Okay, we are good to go. We've got the green light, or the red light, I suppose, considering we're recording. So, hello everyone. Thanks for joining. My name is Conor O'Neill. I'm head of product here at Nearform. I'd like to welcome you all to this very special, one-time only joint episode of Decoded and OpenHive JS. So Decoded, for those of you who've been on before, is this web series focused on putting technology in context, exploring real-life challenges in software development and so on. We've been doing this for quite a while now, but before we get started today, we'd just like to take a moment to extend our sympathies to our colleague James Snell, whose father sadly passed away this week. James is one of the hosts of the OpenHive JS Podcast, and we're really going to miss him today. We really are. But to introduce OpenHive, I'm going to hand you over for a moment to our co-host, Matteo Collina.
Hello, everyone. I'm Matteo Collina, technical director at Nearform and one of the hosts of OpenHive JS, the podcast for all things JavaScript. Thank all of you for joining us today for this very special episode. I have the feeling that it won't be the last, but I don't know. It's one of those things that runs in my head that we'll probably do more of these joint things in the future. But for now, it's the first. That definitely is. To start, we would like to welcome our guests to both shows, OpenHive and Decoded. Come on, OpenHive comes first because, we love podcasts. Anna Henningsen is a software developer, conference speaker, and code contributor to Node.js. And Eric Lewis, who is a software engineer at Seedfire, right? Okay. I hope that I spelled this fine, whatever. I'm sorry about this. And until very recently, worked with us here at Nearform. Thank you both of you for joining us today.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah. Great to be here.
Excellent. So, look, we're here to talk about JavaScript, and it's a small ask. I just want you to predict the next 25 years of a programming language. I thought, hey, let's go for it. So, it's been 25 years recently, and everybody was sort of looking back, and we just thought it'd be interesting to look forward instead and see, well, what could the next 25 years hold? As I tweeted the other day, I'm going to open with the classic Bill Gates quote. Most people overestimate what they can do in a year and underestimate what they can do in 10 years. We just have to extrapolate that to 25. But maybe to ease everybody in, do you want to, each of you just hit on one big milestone of the past 25 years that for you and the whole JavaScript ecosystem was just like a momentous thing, and also that sort of, I suppose, the predictable things that someone back in 1995, 1996 could have guessed, given that JavaScript was going to be successful, the progression of it. And then other things where you would have gone, I cannot believe here we are 25 years later, and this is the shape of JavaScript. So, who wants to go first there?
Yeah, one of the obvious things that I guess somebody in 1999 could have guessed would happen, and that actually happened 10 years later, was something like Node.js coming out on JavaScript outside the server. It's a perfect language for that as well. I don't know that people would have thought about details like async IO or something like that, but it is a language that was bound to become popular through the web, and that people were bound to end up using, and that there were engines around back then already that I guess if somebody would have put the effort in, they could have made something like Node back then even.
And Eric, for you, was there? Yeah, you made a comment there recently, Eric, which just horrified me. I have to say. What age were you? Did you say?
Yeah, so for me, JavaScript came out whenever I was like 4 years old. So I've pretty much spent my entire life using JavaScript. I remember using Netscape back in the day and being amazed that there was dynamic web. And I later on in life, whenever Zanga and MySpace and things like that came out, it used to be really popular, like customize your web pages. So started using JavaScript a little bit through that. And I have to agree with Anna on the fact that it seemed almost inevitable it would eventually end up as like a server technology. With so much JavaScript being written just for the web, it was like a natural progression almost to creating Node.js. And whenever I found out Node.js existed, I just fell in love with it and haven't stopped using it since like 0.1.
Wow.
For me, it's the thing that was very predictable that would happen is the class operator, which is I'm sorry for all of you that love class. I hate class. Okay, it's just so abused as a concept. While the mixed object and functional aspect of JavaScript makes it extremely flexible and really innovative for the time, but also it's really still innovative today. Like prototypical inheritance is fantastic, even though very few people understand it for some reasons. But and so we had the class operator to simplify things. But I thought that was actually going to happen. Essentially, from my point of view, is not going. That was something that was very predictable. What was unpredictable for me was NPM. The success of NPM at the time was very much unpredictable, in the sense that software reuse at scale was an enormous problem in the 90s and an enormous problem in the early 2000s, for the first decade of the 2000s. That most companies even gave up on the idea of reusing software to some extent up until NPM came out. There was a lot of tries, but with a lot of bad failures. Now, we don't have James here. I would have prepared a quick sketch on James. I don't know, because I've been the only, I don't know, Conor, did you do any Java in your previous lifetimes?
I was exposed to it. I tried to avoid it.
So one of the things that I ate the most about Java was class loaders, because in order to, so the biggest problem in Java, and by the way, C#.NET and so on, was loading two different versions of the same thing at the same time, which it's one of the key features of NPM, and what makes NPM special to some extent, and why we have the NPM being black hole in the heaviest, and we are not models for that is the heaviest thing in the universe, right? But it's because it makes software use possible at a scale that we were not being able to do before. So that's that what for me was unpredictable. That was even like it was unpredictable more. That was the greatest innovation of our JavaScript community.
I was going to say that reminds me I was supposed to say something maybe a little bit unpredictable. And the thing that I think is kind of unpredictable, I really wasn't expecting to see, and I was really surprised while working at Nearform, was that you can run JavaScript on like embedded microcontrollers, which that to me is that's still kind of an incredible thing. I know plenty of people are like, why on earth would you ever do that? But Espruino and things like that make it super easy, and I really just never expected to see that personally.
In fact, there it is. You can even put that there. There it is, running on a watch. Yay! And Anna, you mentioned kind of async away, but were there any other kind of big things that you think would have blown the creators' minds?
I mean, it's like, I guess if Node was predictable in some way, then its more or less unpredictable equivalent 25 years ago would have been Electron. Like people would have, I mean, like it's not a completely wild idea, but I don't think anybody would have thought, oh yeah, everything is going to be a web page at some point, and people are just going to write web pages and like distribute them as desktop apps. Not something I would have ever thought possible.
It is still definitely weird that we see JavaScript showing up in a lot of different places. Like I said, microcontrollers, but also like in React Native's backend, making
microcode. JavaScript show up in microcode, folks.
Oh yeah.
I don't know if you are aware that in the new ARM chips, but also I think some of the Intels have some microcode instructions for doing some floating point, some stupid floating point operator that JavaScript do, and which is was very expensive. It requires a lot of CPU cycles to do, and as an optimization, they actually shipped a single instruction to do that to do that thing on one single clock of the CPU. So
yeah, that was in ARM v8 8.3, and it's called the floating point JavaScript convert to signal fixed point rounding to 0 instruction.
That sounds like an x86 instruction, doesn't it? Like,
yeah, it is. Well, it's you know, it's so it's actually it's there. It's fast.
Excellent. Oh, that is very cool.
Yeah.
That is really.
I mean,
cool.
if I were developing CPUs, that's what I would do. I would look at what JavaScript needs and make it faster, because
it's everywhere. And actually, that's not to go down a complete black hole with this, but we've been dealing with some companies in the past sort of 18 months in the financial services industry, some of whom are doing, Electron desktops, but it's for, financial dashboards. And they're talking about, hundreds of thousands of updates a second, because it's all the stock market stuff and so on. Surely that, and you hear about all the stories over the years of guys, connecting optical fiber from one place to another so they can get in, microseconds or picoseconds before somebody else with trading. So a JavaScript optimized processor might even, might fit into that whole world.
Nowadays they use like microwave receivers and things like that, so it's even faster than using optical and high frequency trading. Yeah,
so there could be something there. We get them to fund us. That's what we should do. Right, we're canceling this whole. We've got a job to do. Let's go. Sorry, go on.
I was going to say the concept though of introducing like instructions isn't like specific language level instructions to CPUs isn't necessarily new. There used to be like Lisp machines way back in the day that specifically were optimized for running Lisp. So it's interesting to see that concept coming back. Everything old is new.
Yes.
Everything old is old. Like, everything in computer science was invented in the 80s. Okay, just to remember this. Everything was done in the 80s. I was born in the 80s, so hey, here I am. And that was when all the computers, everything was discovered in that period. We are still rehashing the same things, okay? New generation that are better than previous generations, right? So it's a spiral that always go up. But
there's also things that didn't go so well. Nobody, and I looked at some of the articles that were written about the past, poor old Rhino never gets a mention, which I just think is, so sad. And most people go, what? But we so there were little dead ends. But then taking that idea of kind of little threads going forward and so on, and we don't want to be all about server side and so on. But you've got Deno has come along. Deno has some concepts. Do you expect that languages like Deno and runtimes like Deno will just simply influence JavaScript? So rather than replacing, people go, I like that, and they pull it into the language.
I would certainly expect that to happen rather than for Deno to end up as the more popular server-side platform for JavaScript. I think it's mostly just because Node.js has a large enough head start compared to Deno, but also, the thing that I always predict is going to happen if Deno gets popular enough at some point that people will expect JavaScript libraries to work on it. What's going to happen is that people will find a way to run code written for Deno and Node and vice versa. Yeah, that I feel like that is inevitable if that happens, and that is the way that Deno would influence the language.
I have a question about Deno too that I would like. I know one of y'all can definitely answer it. So I read recently that Deno switched to like parsing like TypeScript natively. What I didn't understand was, does it still use like TypeScript compiler to JS and then it's interpreting that, or is it just literally interpret TypeScript?
There is a new compiler written for TypeScript or something. It's okay. What's the name of this? SWC. I think it's the SWC is a super fast compiler for TypeScript, JavaScript written in Rust.
It still like basically translates to JavaScript first then.
Yeah, it's yes. So
Okay.
essentially, it's transpiler, but it's instead of using the TypeScript transpiler, which is more or less slow, or not slow, but it's not slow, but it's what it is. Okay, it's a lot of very complex code that needs to be optimized and run and so on, and especially for one-off for cold start executions, compiled language have a significant boost versus dynamic languages. So all the fun stuff that the just-in-time compiler can do can't really be done much if your process is not there, right? So all of those things that relies on a really fast cold start or that really want very fast cold start got to be compiled.
Gotcha. Okay, I was just wondering.
Yeah, like from my point of view on the Deno thing, it's I don't know how much you are aware. Deno is pulling in code from forking code from Node core at high speed, so literally copying full chunks of our JavaScript code and sticking them in there. So the reality, so the question, it's not. So the question for me is more how quickly Deno would become capable of running Node programs versus how quickly Node.js could get the best features of Deno. So it's essentially it's that's kind of the discussion. It's not considering how much they work on the compatibility layer, essentially, as well as the other thing that they're working on. But the compatibility layer is one of their biggest.
And just on that, Sean just sent me a question. Somebody put on LinkedIn they're not able to connect in via Zoom. Just it's a follow on from that. So there, we would have got to this eventually anyway, but we may as well ask it now. Do you think that JavaScript will incorporate some aspects of TypeScript into the? Sorry.
It is my take. I think so. So there's going to be something that's going to happen at some point.
I would be curious what that would look like if that actually were to happen, because they're not going to do full TypeScript and they're not like doing bits of it. Seems like a weird choice.
So the best benefit of TypeScript is really code completion and IntelliSense, and the people want to use that just for that bit. So that's what I'm expecting to be supported and together enough to improve the experience. Maybe, I don't know. So there's some also interesting proposal, for example, on decorators that has been being brought up and down a load of times, and which would be quite interesting to see. Decorators are to some extent really powerful in a lot of other languages. And a lot of other languages do really, really interesting things metaprogramming wise. They are nice because you can do certain things with a very terse syntax, while with JavaScript you can currently do more or less the same things, to be honest, using some very clever tricks, using multiple layers of prototypical inheritance, proxies, and bunch of other stuff. Probably not easy or fun to write or maintain. So that would be that's kind of what makes it nicer. That's probably the thing. I don't know, to be honest. It's I'm even whenever somebody asks that question, I'm even on the sense of maybe, but people are thinking about it. That's the feeling. In 25 years. Yeah, well,
it's a bigger
time, right? Let's be sure. We're going to get something like TypeScript. I would really welcome it, because right now, so I'm always saying TypeScript does not exist as a language. There is a TypeScript, which is a multiverse of languages based on your TS config, based on your TS config.json. It's not like you can be typing using TypeScript, and there you get that variation of the same things that are parent to each other, but they're not really compatible depending on those options. So having one TypeScript thing, that would be very nice for me. So
I mean, I I know you have some strong opinions on TypeScript that I definitely do not agree with, but so I mean, for example, like TypeScript, yeah, sure, it varies on what your config contains, but it's also like everything is compatible enough that you can work with it reasonably well between packages, and that's what counts. And I don't know, if you were asking me, I would say in 25 years, TypeScript is going to have edged out vanilla JavaScript pretty much out of the picture for modern new projects.
Okay.
Also, yes, I love tech writers.
As long as implicit typing and everything like that is well handled, probably so.
But
Swift
isn't
is
it
very much like that?
But I was just thinking that it's one of the interesting things, and I mentioned it when we were talking the other day, is when we talk about JavaScript. I suppose there's two things. One is the we're talking about far more than the core language. We're talking about the ecosystem around it, but also effectively the future of the web. And what the shape of that is. But one thing that did jump out at me was because it's an ecosystem, and you can get things done. Like you can create JavaScript without having to ask anybody's permission, and people can just use it or not use it. You don't have to go to a ECMAScript to build something like TypeScript. But Anna, you created worker threads, and that was an individual creating a major new feature for Node. And we're 25 years into JavaScript, and an individual like yourself still has the ability to have huge impact like that on a very successful language. But I suppose my question isn't that nice? But isn't that refreshing that you can do that still? That you're not limited by what a foundation or somebody said. You can create this, and then people can go, that's a really good idea. Let's pull that into Node Core.
Yeah, so I mean, you have to see that I was also kind of in a special position in both like my familiarity with the native side of Node, which is there's a handful of people who work very much with that, but not a lot of people do, literally a handful.
Okay.
And also I had been active enough and long enough on the Node.js project that it was not an issue to push it through politically in the open source project. I think those were pretty big factors in actually making that work. But yeah, if somebody finds the time and the energy to do something like that, I totally think that, and a project that they want to do, I totally think that that's something that people still can do. Yes.
Which is fantastic. To me, it's fantastic that there is still an openness there, that it isn't. And I suppose I'll get onto my hobby horse about apps versus web and all of that, but there isn't a corporation dictating what people can or cannot do on the web platform. It's you can decide what you want to do and leverage the kind of the tools that are available to you. We're actually, I can't believe we're 25 minutes in already and we're barely scratching. So JavaScript is, we call it the dominant language right now. As 25 years ago, COBOL was the dominant language. And I actually finally, I can't believe I read a book that was written in 1981, over late last year, but I read The Soul of the New Machine, which was a brand new mini computer that Data General was creating. And everybody's going, data who? And a mini what? But it was absolute, bleeding edge stuff in 1980 and 1981 when they were creating the stuff, as was COBOL. And now COBOL is technical debt, but it's still everywhere, and it still does the job. People continue to use it, not because they're forced to, but those systems continue to work very well for what they do. So I suppose my question is what does JavaScript in 25 years' time, not what the language looks like in 25 years' time, but JavaScript that's been written now and going into systems now, what does that look like? And a real practical question, and and it's more of a top programming tips, but are there things people can do now with how they're writing code and what they're doing that means that they will be praised in future generations and not have a, Y2K type moment in 2046?
I definitely think it's going to be really interesting to see if we can still run, existing React applications today, 25 years from now, especially with like the adoption of suspense and things like that, and how they kind of the way they implemented algebraic side effects uses kind of a little bit of what you might consider like quirks of the language. So yeah, I mean, I feel like a lot of JavaScript today is probably it's very framework oriented and things like that, and things break pretty quickly. So the question is like, can we still run our React?
What scares me more even than running them, I think we will be able to run them. The web is really committed to backward compatibility. So I would be very much surprised if they did not run anymore. My main concern is not about running, it's about building and maintaining them. Once upon a time, the web was so nice that everybody could just download the source code of a file and just edit them. And the status of and the complexity of the front-end stack right now is such that we have like these big tools and frameworks that are needed to actually compile and create those apps. The same executables and libraries. So it's not like we are at a point already where we cannot build some old versions of Node.js anymore. Like it's essentially, we are at a point that you try to download the source code and it does not even build on your machine or your MacBook or your machine because some kernel or dependency has changed the API and it does not build anymore. So this is essentially, this is what scares me more, is that certain tool will go into become obsolete, and it will be too far away for anybody to fix. And so we'll need to throw away some of the web apps and things that we are building in this decade.
Kind of sounds like you're saying Babel will be with us the next 25 years.
That's more or less what I'm saying. I don't, so it is the thing. I would love to not to. Like the web that I would like to see is a web where we don't have those massive tool chains anymore. Mm-hmm. However, this is I think it's a race against, it's wishful thinking. I think more tools will be more tools, not less tools. And there are some pretty bad hardware barrier for that to happen on what we need to let through on the wire. It might well be that some part of that tool chain gets embedded in the cloud. So essentially you are publishing your JavaScript source code to the cloud, and then the cloud automatically does and packs all that production experience for you so that you don't need to figure out all the things that are needed. And deliver the best experience. Like most of that can be automated, and from my point of view, it will.
Sounds pretty magical.
Yeah,
pretty magical. But is there a full circle thing going to happen there, where we went from all you needed was a text editor, to get your stuff done. Now you need a massive tool chain and bundlers and all this type of stuff to build even, a simple site in inverted commas. Do you expect, and I know the complexity won't go away because this is all to do with complexity, but could the tool chains, reduce down to, one giant monolith, which does everything for you and you don't have to worry about all these interactions and so on?
That reminds me of Rome.
Yeah, that's the direction. Yes, that's the direction where I think things are going.
What was that word? Sorry, I missed that.
So Rome.js, or I think it might just be called Rome, the tool by Sebastian McKenzie that is, it's trying to put together all of the things that you would typically do in a JavaScript build into one kind of monolithic package. So linting, building, testing, everything like that.
Ooh. That's my weekend gone. Have a look at that.
That showed up in the Q&A too. I didn't even see that.
Oh, interesting. And I suppose, as I said, back to my bugbear, which is mobile. And if mobile takes over the world and everything is Kotlin and everything is Swift and everything's native and everything's apps, what happens to the web and to JavaScript and to openness? And I won't have a discussion about freedom or anything like that, but the ability to publish whatever you want, how you want, using the tools you want, and back to JavaScript. Are we on a path that we can't get off now? And that when we talk about JavaScript in 25 years, that will it potentially have been rendered irrelevant because native mobile has kind of just taken over?
Well, I can definitely say that like JavaScript today already is used on native platforms. It's used in React Native, and that's a pretty cool usage of it. It's really interesting too that while JavaScript might be like the base languages being used, it's not necessarily being run through the same engines that we'd use for like Node.js. So for React Native today, it uses like JavaScript core. And then on Android, you can use either V8 or you can use JavaScript core compiled for Android. But even more interesting is that like Facebook created something called Hermes, which is another way of kind of having like a virtual machine to run JavaScript code. So it seems like, in my opinion, when it comes to building native apps, I guess, using JavaScript as sort of the tool that it's kind of becoming its own thing in a way. So I'm trying to think of how to say this, but it's becoming its own thing in some ways. So like it's independent of necessarily the engine that's running it, and it's becoming a really important tool on native, especially to leverage your existing native teams or your existing like web development teams or backend teams. You can do a lot of really cool stuff using JavaScript on native as well.
And could it be then, and to take a positive note on it, that the native languages on mobile were almost like a temporary aberration, that when original iPhone came out, it was supposed to be web apps, but things weren't good enough back then and they weren't performant enough, and so we switched to Java and Objective-C and so on, and now we're at a point where actually React Native is good enough, and if it had official support from Google and Apple, it could be even better. I don't know. That's me being positive and being optimistic for the future.
Yeah, and I think one of the interesting things that's happening, especially in the Swift world, would be like Swift UI, which is instead of them necessarily adopting JavaScript as the language divorce or whatever to be used for making native applications, instead what they've been doing is taking inspiration from NPM for Swift Package Manager, taking inspiration from React for creating like a declarative way of building your interfaces and things like that. So I think we'll see. I think that using JavaScript for native apps is a really interesting thing and a really good thing. And especially with React Native, there's new features coming out that are going to make it a lot faster and feel a lot more native. But I think that one of the most important things JavaScript has contributed to the native languages, and this is maybe even a little bit of a battle between native languages and JavaScript, because they saw JavaScript coming to eat their pie, is that there's a lot of inspiration that's happening on the more native side to make things more dynamic and easier to build with.
By the way, I would also like completely not be surprised if in 25 years we had something that compiles JavaScript to native code. Obviously not the same way it happens with C, because JavaScript is a very different kind of language, but it feels like something that somebody's going to build at some point.
Very cool. That would be very cool.
Yeah.
I would love that. To be honest, it will make all our code run really fast. So I will be very, very happy to see that exist.
Is it worth throwing out a generic discuss WASM question. That was a no then. How long do you have? Can you do WASM in about 2 minutes if we could just cover the entire? But I don't want to hear the massive big questions, but I suppose one of them is less about the language and less about the technology ecosystem and more about the organization and people ecosystem that, we have had various foundations. We have the Node Foundation, the OpenJS Foundation, and so on. And
we have the Rust Foundation and the GraphQL Foundation. Come on,
I'm assuming we'll have
a lot of foundations.
We'll have the Promises Foundation pretty soon, the Async Await Foundation. And ECMA, I can't even say it, ECMA and so on. But all of these sort of guiding and directing and nudging and hopefully, doing the right thing for whatever the languages, that specific languages that we're talking about. But one of the most important from the very, very start has been what is now the Mozilla Foundation. Obviously, the usage of Firefox continues to go through the floor, which, breaks my heart. I was Netscape Navigator, then I was Mozilla Suite, then I was Firefox, and then, like everybody, I ended up going onto Chrome for speed. What role do you think they could play in sort of, being they represent the open web and so on, but are there specific things you think they could be doing over the next 3, 5, 10 years that could really help drive JavaScript, protect the open web, that they aren't doing now, just to be a little bit controversial, I suppose, as we head towards wrapping up? Or is that too heavy?
Yeah.
It's a bit heavy. It's more one for the pub, I think, when we're all allowed to meet again.
We need a beer.
Yeah, I think we do.
I'm slightly tempted to say, do the Google thing and drop "Don't be evil" from your motto, but
Oh Lord, yeah. Well, it's more, give them a focus. I think that was where kind of my.
I'm still using Firefox.
Obviously, I've got Firefox, I've got Brave, I've got Chrome, I don't have Vivaldi, I can't say, but so look, we normally these sessions that we have, they're always supposed to be 30 minutes. They've never been 30 minutes. I've never got it in under about 40. But I think it'd be just nice to kind of do a little wrap up if, cast your minds forward, go extreme and just, one thought about what JavaScript 2046, and I can't believe I just said JavaScript 2046, could look like, or something that would make your heart glad, that when you get up one morning in 2046 and you have a look at JavaScript and you go, yeah, that's just fantastic. We nailed that. To each of you there to give us a thought on that.
Cancelable promises.
It's going to take 25 years to get that.
Well, it took 5 years to crash Node on under rejections. So, it's really like cancelable promises. It's really something for 25 years. Yes, I don't think it's shippable in 25 years though. I don't know.
Yeah, I would really look forward to that. I think that would be nice. And yeah, I think that's pretty much all I want. So
you don't have that much. And is there anything for you?
Yeah, I mean, just I don't know, just mentioning the things that I already said. Like, in the end, we'll have something that compiles TypeScript to native code, and it'll be fast, or maybe to WASM. I think things like that already exist, but might not just be popular enough. And we'll see more things like that happening, I think.
Okay.
I did read a little bit about like compilable JavaScript or compilable TypeScript, and I think one of the primary things was that understanding like hot paths or something like that was a little bit difficult. So you could get like an initial cold boot like improvement, but actually running through your paths and things like that without actually training the system makes it a little bit difficult to do. But I'd love to see that too, like self-contained. You know, Deno kind of does that a little bit, but like it's not necessarily self-contained, but it is. I think that's pretty cool. I would look forward to that too.
Matteo?
I don't know. Yeah, I know what I want to say. So I think we will, what will be finally happening, it's a little bit more, a more coherent isolation model for globals in JavaScript. This is definitely something that I think is going to happen. A lot of people are working on this problem. However, it's a very hard problem. So we will be getting a much better isolation model when you build JavaScript applications. This is becoming really, really important the more we move forward. And so that would be my generic bet. And more of that, of the tool chain, will move into the cloud. So essentially, like it will be extremely simple for people to develop new JavaScript application, both front end and mobile and everything. So I think there will be a bright future for JavaScript.
Yeah.
Are there some examples of moving to the cloud now? Like,
yes.
like
So there is. You can. So let's consider this. Okay, you have CodeSandbox for editing and CodeSpaces from GitHub that can allow you to edit things already. You have there is the new Snowpack the ex-Pika, the Pika folks, they are working on this problem. They are doing transpiling on the flight for you, and they can, if you're doing transpiling, you can as well just do bundling from what it matters from my point of view. So you can just point it to a module, and they will get you something that can run in the browser. So they can convert JSX and TSX to that. So yeah, there are people working on this problem, and if you combine all those things together, as well as lambdas and a lot of other stuff, I think we can have a very good picture on. It will take a decade or more to get for all those technologies to matter from my point of view, but it will be really fun to see.
I have one more question then, which would be, so if everything's moving to the cloud like this, then if I'm a new developer wanting to start, can I run all this stuff on my local machine?
That is the $1 million question. And the answer would be that the cloud providers will generally gift all of that to you for free and lock you in even before you start learning program software development. I don't know if you're going to like it or not, these nice futures that I am depicting, but I would. But that's what's likely going to happen in the coming future.
Matteo's not in charge of business models.
Oh no! No, as a punter, I just want Yahoo pipes to come back and just output JavaScript, and then I'd be happy. I can just drag and drop and make things happen, and not have to write code to pull data out of a timesheet system so I can generate an Excel spreadsheet that I can send. You don't want to know my exciting life right now. We had, just on what you were saying there, assembly script. So Mauro on LinkedIn was saying assembly script is a TypeScript variation that compiles to WASM. There was a question about Rome. I'm going to read Rodrigo's comment simply because I presume this is just to get a rise out of half the audience. They're saying it's the system D of JavaScript. It's like the Red Hat people and the not Red Hat people on either side of that. I'm definitely going to look that up after this because that does sound very interesting. Look, I thought that was fantastic, and I think there's hours more to be had there. When we have, we obviously have NodeConf of some shape, which I won't pre-announce yet, coming in 2021. I hope we can continue these types of conversations there. Maybe we could have and he's forgotten the name of the system. We could have a clubhouse room where we just talk about this for 24 hours solid. Or as I saw somebody say earlier on, is Clubhouse not just TikTok for boomers?
Well, I think it is, but that's, we need to ask to the younger generations of this group.
Yes. So look, really honestly, Anna and Eric, thanks so much for this. I just got so much out of it. As I said, this was a joint episode of Decoded. So go to nearform.com/decoded and over to Matteo to tell people a bit more about OpenHive JS.
Yay, and you can find OpenHive JS, the podcast for all things JavaScript, at nearform.com/OpenHive JS. Where you can listen to this and all previous episodes and future episodes, and with your links to your favorite podcast player. We are on Spotify, so I receive notification on Spotify, but whatever. A lot of other people use other things, so it's pretty nice. I just want to conclude that Anna and Eric, thank you both very much for jumping into this discussion today. It was really phenomenal. I loved it. We should do it way sooner. We should really do a clubhouse thing at some point. It's going to be fun. It was very, very valuable hearing your perspective and predictions. And thank you.
Yeah, thanks all. See you soon.
Thank you so much.
See you.